So my name is Aaron Dacey. I'm with NCDOT. I want to introduce our panel members in no particular order. Tony Sorandez from GPI. We got Taylor Saffo from Saffo Contractors. And Robbie Caralla from Georgia DOT, and then Derek Castle from Sherman-Williams Company. So thank you, gentlemen, for attending the coatings panel. So the purpose of the panel is just to generate discussion, generate questions you may have as a contractor, specifier, or owner, operator to the panel. And so I think, Tony, I'm just going to start with you. Have you got a general question you want to pose, or do you want to see what?
No, I think we'll just open up to the audience and see what they have to say. Again, my name's Tony Sardinas. I'm with GPI. I'm the corrosion protection pursuits leader for the company. I go around the country talking about bridge preservation through coatings. Our company provides coating inspectors, technical services, and I also provide technical services as well to our DOT clients.
Yes, my name is Taylor Saffo. I'm with Saffo Contractors. We've been in business since 1993, doing with coatings preservation, both in the industrial setting and the DOT space. I am one of the chief estimators of the company right now, and we're pretty excited to be here.
Derek Castle, Sherman-Williams Company, technical market manager for Bridge and Highway, cover the western half of North America. So. Work with DOT specifically on addressing specification concerns, specification questions, sampling and testing, and product approvals, and then also with the contractors on very large projects for RFIs and inspection-related issues with the coatings.
I'm Robbie Caralla. I'm with Georgia DOT, and I'm the state bridge maintenance engineer. And I guess we do a bunch of paintings, like using your product. So we've been having a lot of issues as far as figuring out if it is a contractor who's missing the painting job, or it's our inspectors who are not doing their job. So let's see what we can resolve.
And again, thank you for the panel. Thank you for you guys attending. If there's a specific question that you have in the audience, we can pass around the mic. We have just some general questions we can ask. But I'm going to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have a question they want to propose? I mean, don't all run up here at once. Like, I know none of y'all are timid, right?
In Georgia, are your inspectors certified, or do you use construction inspectors for paint inspection?
So we use our construction inspector, and we're seeing that they're not qualified as a paint inspector, and we're hoping that if we could provide them a training to help them identify any issues, or we're trying to talk and trying to get a contract just for inspection, paint inspection. So that's what I was talking with Tony.
Thank you. We work in a lot of states, and most states do require NACE. Now, if you guys are in the coatings industry in a sense and understand, both NACE and SSPC have formed one organization called AMP, the Association for Material Protection and Performance. So they now have those certification program for inspectors, for cathodic protection, for certifying or qualifying contractors. But most states do require coating inspectors to have the training. Some of them will specify a peered inspector, but for the most part, they're just requesting a trained coating inspector.
Also, just to add a plug in, we talked about AMP and the combined effort for SSPC and NACE. So owners and specifiers, if you specify the QP 1, 2, or 3 program, you should automatically get a qualified, certified NACE inspector or certified inspector. So
you will, QP1 or QP2 certified contractor has to provide a trained coating inspector, which is the QC, which represents the contractor. But from an owner standpoint, which is the QA, again, they typically require any level, and once in a while, an owner will ask for a specific type of level with specific years of experience. And just to let you guys know, if you have any questions about that, I'm actually a member of the certification program committee that oversees those certifications and training and those type of things, and I'll be glad to answer any questions about that as well.
Well, this is a question from Illinois, so maybe other states have better experiences, but we have struggled with painting over railroads. From a contractor's perspective, I mean, normally what we do is we say, well, contractor, you work it out with the railroad. We'll give you the contact information. We have, we'll pay the insurance, we'll pay the flaggers, but you work out the details. I've had a couple of projects where the contractor just threw his hands up, we can't work out the details, and then because it dragged on so long, that work was just deleted because, hey, that area doesn't need corrosion protection. So advice is what I'm looking for.
I would say from the contractor's perspective, and again, I have personally never worked in the state of Illinois, but we have done a lot of work with CSX or railroads of that nature. I would say it's the same pain point. It's really difficult to work out, I guess, the means and methods with what their scheduling process is, with the insurance, making sure that with the DOT as well, that we're all in compliance, because they kind of have their own governing body of rules and regulations. So it is a massive pain point for us, and it really depends on who we've been working with, depends on how easy it is, what the volume of traffic is on that particular rail is in particular. So I know that's not a great answer, but it's the truth. It's a pain point, and there's not a lot of good answers or things that I've seen so far other than, like I said, it's just a rail that's not very active.
We're on the same boat. It's a pain, and a lot of time it hurts us because we can't go paint in a 20-year interval or 25-year interval. So a lot of time when we try to put a project together, we try to group them separately. So we want to put all the bridges which does not have a railroad involvement as a separate project versus lump 4 or 5 of them with all the issues and then take 4 or 5 years, whatever time it takes. You got to paint the bridge eventually. So I mean, that's what we are doing. We're trying to avoid railroad bridges and put it as a separate project. It's a hassle, yeah.
Just to reemphasize that, it is a pain. It is a very slow process. A lot of times, like you said, Sarah, owners will just cancel that part of the project because it's difficult, especially when you're dealing with electrified rails and you've got a short window period, maybe of 4 hours. I mean, I've had conversations with owners and, it's painstaking, but, you can't set up a real containment system, right? You can't, go in there and abrasive blast it. And a lot of times, we always recommend doing a power tool cleaning and putting a surface tolerant coating system. It'll, if you do it right, I mean, again, you may do half a beam a night, but, there are ways to combat it, but owners have to realize it's a very slow process and it's going to be a costly process.
Restate, yeah, so NCDOT, we've had several of them over the railroad, and yes, they are very, very painstaking, an industry based off of 2 horses rear end, and it hasn't really evolved much from that. So we've had a lot of great coordination within our agency with the CSX and the Norfolk Southern Railway, but it is painstaking, and we often will lump them in, similar, Robbie and others, we'll lump them in, we'll mix them in one or 5 or one of, we'll make those the last one, and then the resident engineer really has to dig in as far as the contract time frame and really work with that. So there's a lot of ongoing working coordination. So
one question is right now, since we don't have a certified inspector inspecting the paint and not sure based on the coordination how long. So for the certified, if we want to get certified inspector inspect the painting job, what's the estimate? Does that person needs to be there all the time, making sure it's cleaned, they're doing whatever it needs to be done before it gets painted? What's the estimated time? For example, let's say the bridge is 300 feet long, 50 feet wide. What's the estimated time you think the inspector needs to be there?
great question.
It's an interesting question. Really, again, when I talk to clients, having a part-time inspector doesn't work. And, we have a contractor on the panel here, right? But there are contractors. If you have a contractor, if you have an inspector out on a job and you ask that consultant or that inspector to work part-time, a good contractor is going to work with that inspector. A bad contractor is going to take advantage of that, and they're going to do certain work. They're going to put claims in saying, hey, they weren't here, so to do the inspection. So there's a lot of issues with that. Typically, when you have an inspector, you want to have an inspector there from, when the contractor shows up till they leave. Now, at the end of the day, if they're rolling hose or doing, demobilizing, that's fine. But, typically, that inspector is going to document the day, the crew size, what's going on. They're going to, while the contractor is abrasive blasting, they're going to monitor the containment system for emissions, right? And then, of course, they're going to do their inspection. They're going to monitor while the contractor's preparing the paint, if it's a 2 or 3 part, the proper mixing of that coating system before they apply it. So they should be there at all phases of the project. And even when they're disposing of the waste, a lot of times our inspectors and other consultant inspectors will sign off on the manifest. So they're just not there doing the cleaning and painting. They're watching all phases of the project. But honestly, if an owner gets into a situation where they're looking for part-time, it's tough, because a contractor, again, could take advantage of that situation and say, hey, the guy wasn't there. Yeah, we did tell him we weren't going to do anything for 3 hours, but we decided we were doing something. We tried to call him, and so we waited for a couple hours, so now we're going to put in a claim for our equipment, for manpower, and all that stuff. So got to be careful with that.
Not so much to the question that he asked. I think I have a lot of questions as far as the way that the industry is, especially as someone that's grown up in this business. Just a little bit more background. I've been in it since I was 15 years old. I'm 30 now, so I've been in this for 15 years, seen a lot of different perspectives, and I've had great inspectors that I've worked with in the past, and then I've had people that have been extremely inexperienced, and they didn't know what they were looking at, and they didn't know how to work with the contractor to go through the inspection process, because they don't really understand the means and methods, because what they've studied is in a textbook. And that's always been the biggest issue that I've always seen is, I went to NC State, I did engineering, and what you learn in a textbook is not the same thing as what you apply in the field. And I'm sure most people in this room have come across that at some point in time, and that's always been my pain point with the inspection process, is because I've seen both sides of the coin, and as a contractor where it's a little bit different, every second counts, right? It just becomes very difficult because, again, I guess the analogy that I would like to use is, and I'm not sure how many people have played sports in this room, but I think it's the best analogy, is if you're a professional athlete, it's hard to have a coach, right, to come in and tell you how to do your job, right? Like, how would you dribble a basketball, or how would you go out there and throw a football? For me as a contractor, it's the same thing. I get into the field and I have moments where I have an inspector that says, well, that's not how you're supposed to spray the paint or mix it or set up set up your equipment. And it's hard to really kind of listen to that, because it's, man, have you ever done that? Have you ever actually grabbed a spray line or mixed the paint or, rigged a bridge? Because I'm all for the teamwork, but it's got to be teamwork with experience to have a knowledge base behind that.
I think we finally opened up the big can. Darren, did you have anything as a? Do you want to touch any of this? Because we hadn't hit Robbie's question. I don't think I think we're getting there.
Tag along, I'm gonna
Okay.
I think so prior to Sherwin-Williams, I was with a Kentucky Transportation Cabinet for 20 years. So I've seen, I helped build the inspection program that Kentucky started that eventually rolled into the Bridge Coating Inspectors Program under SSPC prior to AMP. So I've seen a lot of this, and I think there's certainly key components to inspectors having real world experience. Just you don't learn everything out of a textbook. You get a lot of applicable skills by being there, seeing, doing, and experiencing as an inspector. I also think there's one of the comments that worries me that is inspectors coming in and telling you that's not right, you got to set this up differently or do something differently. That's borderline direction of work, and that's not the inspector's role. Whether they're state employee inspector or they're a consultant inspector, direction of work is a slippery slope that usually ends up in lawsuits.
Another idea, right? Like to address this one, rather than pointing fingers at inspector, pointing fingers at contractor, pointing fingers at product, like can we kind of come up with combined agreement saying like with the contractor and supplier and say, hey, you know what, we feel good about our product and the contractor feels good about their job. Can we get some kind of, if you guys feel like the painting should last for 20 years, like do you think the owner should look at it and say, try to get a warranty for 20 years, combined joint warranty as far as the product and the work? Like, I mean, do you think that would end up costing the owner too much because there's warranty for 20 years? Or I'm just trying to figure out because, you know.
These are great questions.
Yeah.
I'd like to attack that. So let's go out of the DOT setting so I can give you a different perspective. Let's go into the industry setting. So we do this all the time for our clients. I've got Kinder Morgan's a big client of ours, Colonial Tank, Transmontane, and we have to warranty the work that we do. So what we do is we bring in the manufacturer rep when we get done with the job, and then they come in and they do a separate inspection on the tank. Now obviously, right, I guess the big issue would be is there collusion involved? Is there going to be somebody that's just passing it off, right, because they're good friends? Well, that's the point where I think that it is nice to have a third-party inspector because we are warrantying the work, we're certified, and with AMP, we've got to, as a contractor, go through so many different hoops to just be able to do the work, right? We've got to have NACE level inspectors on our staff. We've got to have CAS, qualified applicators that are out into the field. So, correct. So the thing that I've always argued is if we're getting all these certifications and if we're going to warranty the work and if we're going to work with the manufacturer as well to also warranty that piece, would it not be better to bring in the third-party inspection to come in after a year or 2 or 5 or whatever that warranty period is to go in and start doing some destructive tests on the bridge or whatever structure it is to make sure that the coating was applied? Because if you've got that warranty period, I wouldn't think that it would take long for many contractors to realize we need to be doing this work right, because if I've got to come back 5 years down the line and repaint a bridge or redo a lining in a tank, you're going to be losing money and you're not going to be operating like that in a business structure anymore.
Well, first thing I would say is there's no profit in rework, right? So when the contractor comes back, everything's out of his pocket. We've worked with several states that have warranties. Specifically, one of the states, the Maryland Transportation Authority, which is a toll facility, they have 2-year warranties, and we actually, as part of our service to them under our contracts, will actually go out there every year for those 2 years and do an evaluation of the bridge. And they have it based on 1%, I think, per element. So per beam, per stiffener, per diaphragm, if there's more than 1% of failure, contractor has to go back and redo that work. Again, trying to remember because I work with a lot of different owners, but we do that there where we'll go there before, either during that period or right before that 2-year period ends, maybe 6 months before, and evaluate the structure for them to see if there's any type of coating failure or anything like that. But warranties are always good because when you have a warranty, the contractor owns that structure for as long as that warranty is. If it's 1 year, 2 years, I've seen 5 year, I've seen 10-year warranties. So they're good to have because again, it forces that contractor to do a job because they don't. Again, good contractors don't want to come back. They want to do it right the first time. And just to make one little comment on what Derek said about inspectors and means and methods, that is very true. No inspector should be involved with the means and methods, and like you said, Taylor, of the contractor. They're there to, basically, there's 3 things an inspector does. They witness, they verify, and they document. and everything is objective based on that specification.
Yeah, great point. So, I want to just kind of circle back. I want to get back to the audience as well, but, as far as, Robbie, to your question, I think for you, as an owner, I think you just need to identify what's important to you. Is that, is it a, high ADT bridge that, you need continuous inspection on? What do you want to inspect? What's your funding look like? And then, going back to the warranty, I think it boils down to the contractor's bonding, right? How long are you able to require the contractor to bond their work for whatever period of time? And then is the painting contractor and the paint manufacturer, are they on board for that? So I think there's a lot of coordination that has to go into the specification writing to address all those items. So
my name is Jeff Pouliot. I retired last year from Florida DOT. Yeah, so when I was the long-term chair of the group over here that was the coatings group, working group. And I was also, went to Cobb's, and I was the vice chair of the Bridge Preservation Group, which also dealt with coating issues. So been involved with this a long period of time. Now, there's two things I just want to tell you, and then just, for food for thought. I recognized this warranty situation a long time ago, and I tried to push through an NCHRP project unsuccessfully on about 3 years. So before I left the Florida DOT, I did an internal project where the idea was to develop performance measures for acceptable levels of, testing to determine, actually it's visual testing more than anything else, to determine whether or not a particular product has been applied properly, and then if it's not, have very small penalties. We used the Maryland as a starting point. I got the Maryland specifications from Charlie Brown. You guys probably know who he is. And that's what they were advancing with Florida DOT. And my protege, the guy taking over from me, Felix Padilla, is going to present that at Cobb's, and he can present it over here. He wasn't able to travel to this one, but he's going to basically bring it to you all when it's said and done. The other thing I want to say is, just so I can get this out, there's a duplex coating system research that we initiated when I was in that group, and it's been going on for 5 years. As a matter of fact, Ivan Lasser was presenting next door, was on that committee, and is coming to fruition. The duplex coating system is a metallizing system which has high-performance paint on it. The theory is, of course, the paint has to deteriorate to a certain point, and then the metallizing really gets engaged. They're predicting, with the right systems, a possible 70-year service life. So for all these people in the audience over here, what does that mean? Probably after 30 years, your high-performance paint system has failed, but your metallizing underneath will continue. So if you got the money, what you do is you repaint the bridge. If you haven't got the money, it's still going to be okay. You might have to touch up the metallizing to keep it going for 70 years. So this could be a game changer. That research, I talked to Ivan Lasser, is supposed to be coming out in the next month or so. He's been saying that for the last year and a half, but he said this time is for real. So stay tuned for that, okay? Thank you.
Sarah Wilson with Illinois. I was just going to comment, one thing we do to kind of help spread the money out for paint consultants is if we're going to handle it in-house, we'll ask the paint consultant to come out for a month or a couple weeks to lay the groundwork at the start of the project. To go over the containment, all the documents that have to be turned in, to make sure the documents are turned in properly, and to get the state inspector off to the right track. So then the state inspector is supposed to, hopefully can learn and take over from there. But I agree, you need to have somebody out there the whole time they're painting. Obviously, ideally a qualified one that's been through the training, but at least maybe someone who's been given a hand up from a qualified inspector to start. So just an idea.
The performance measures we're trying to develop with that research, or that they're trying to do, and I'm looking at the contractor over here, has to be achievable. If it's not achievable, it's not fair. after you've done your first project, the costs are just going to go up. It's just unbelievable. If it's not achievable, then basically it's useless. So that's where the science is going into it. But the contract language is fairly straightforward. The penalty should be small so that doesn't put you out of business, but it gives you enough incentive to want to do the job right. Does that sound like a good philosophy, sir?
Sounds pretty good.
Hello, I'm Martin Gang. I'm with the International Zinc Association. Actually, Jeff invited me to one of the meetings to talk about duplex coatings. We work all around the world, and the country Norway has been specifying duplex coatings for all their steel bridges since 1965, and really with great success. So they put a thermal spray zinc and then a paint top coat. So many of those bridges are approaching 50 years old now, with no maintenance at all. And when we paint on steel, there's a criteria, 5 to 10% of red rust showing before we start paint maintenance. And now in Norway, when the paint top coat starts to degrade, then they just water blast and repaint. So they're never blasting to bare metal. The zinc always stays in place. The steel never shows corrosion. So they're very proactive, which is a very different maintenance strategy. But the longevity and cost for maintenance is, the longevity is very, very high, and the cost for maintenance is very low. It's proven to be a very effective corrosion protection system.
We could definitely go off on different paint systems, duplex, and the different paint systems. But I did want to circle back to our original question of how much inspection does an owner need to have, right? And what is their comfort level? So,
From a previous owner and now as a coatings manufacturer's representative, full-time inspection during any of the production work is highly recommended. There's just not a good way around it. As Tony said, part-time inspection is problematic because you inevitably don't have the documentation you need as the owner to, if there is a problem, you don't have the documentation to ferret out what really went on.
and I think also too, I think in a sense it does help. It is great for the contractor to have that continuity.
Greg Richards with KTA. The other problem you run into is staffing it. If you're a company like ours and like GPI that offers that service, we can't do part-time because we won't have the staff to be there when the contractor needs them. And like Derek and Tony and all of you all said, full-time's the best way to assure that you're getting what you're paying for. And also, you're going to get what you inspect. If you don't inspect at all, then those areas that don't get inspected are going to be suspect.
Yeah, great point, great point.
I just have a quick follow-up. So with Maryland, do they have an inspector as well as that 2 years warranty thing where you go there once every year? Is that like coupled, or just they don't have an inspector on site when they do? They don't have a DOT inspector on site?
Yeah, the warranty inspections are done after the project's completed. So in this case, we were hired by the toll facility in Maryland to do those warranty inspections. So we'll physically go out there, and it's a visual. It's not, you're not really going up and touching every element of the structure. It's more of a visual, just taking a look at the whole thing and seeing if you see anything, because it's pretty obvious if you see something, So, and a lot of times you don't have, because of some of it being on Interstate 95, on highly traveled roads, to close a lane down, to do those type of things, it's difficult. So they more do a visual inspection of those bridges.
Yeah, his question, I think, is the contract with Maryland is multifaceted. You have full-time inspection at the project level during construction phase, and then another facet of that contract is the follow-on inspection for the warranty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So, full-time inspection on the project.
Okay.
Taylor, haven't y'all had done Maryland work? Have you had any experience with that particular question on Maryland DOT?
As far as the warranty is concerned,
Yeah.
we've gone through the process. We've never had an issue, but we have gone through the process, yes.
Just one follow-up thought on warranties. There are obviously examples of warranties in the industry that are relatively long-term. Those can be significantly costly to your contract pricing, your project pricing, contract pricing. So keep in mind, if you're looking at warranties, I'm not saying they're a bad idea, but you need to understand what you're writing into your contract. You need to understand what your definition of failure is and be very specific on that, as well as pay attention to your time frame. Latent defects don't take 10 years to show up. Most of the time, depending on the service environment of the facility, structure, whatever you want to say, year in the coastal region around the U.S., you're going to see defects. If there's going to be a defect, it's probably going to show up after one season, after a year. If you're middle of the U.S. where you have less corrosive environment, maybe a couple years. But if there's going to be a defect, if there's a problem with the coating or the coating application or the surface prep, it's going to show up in a few years, not decade.
I think 2 years should be good. Like if we're seeing any defect, and what's happening is like, I would say the inspector, there are a certain location where you can't have easy access, and we've been seeing like, not being cleaned properly. We could see some pack rust at those locations, and the contractor is done, and the construction inspector, they don't feel comfortable going out there checking at every single corner, and later on our inspector goes out there with the super snooper, and that's easier for them to identify. And we've been seeing the steel not being cleaned properly, or there has been incident where they blast clean this steel and we had some section loss, holes through the steel, and that never got reported, and that's concerning. So
Open up the floor to questions from an owner's perspective, from the manufacturers, from the contractor, and as well as a consultant firm. So think about that.
David Snoke, North Carolina. I was curious from any of you if you have. Is there strong pros and cons for doing just beam and contract rather than full girder painting?
It just depends on your situation, right? When I go around the country and talk about these things, what's your budget, what's your availability, right? With that budget, and of course we all know corrosion. Most of the corrosion, or the heaviest corrosion, for the most part, occur at the abutments, open joints, where you have leaking joints. You have those type of things that cause those premature failures or those accelerated failures. So, if you want to hold that structure, doing a zone painting, which is basically beam ends and bearings about 5 or 10 feet out, to blasting it, right, to an SP10 and applying that zinc epoxy urethane system, that'll work, especially if the rest of the bridge is in pretty decent shape. I mean, if you're looking at a small structure and you're just doing beam ends and bearings, by the time that contractor runs their cables and all that stuff, for a little extra money, you would have that whole bridge done, right? It just depends on the size of the structure, the level of corrosion. Is it isolated? Is it scattered? And if it's isolated in those areas, a zone painting's not a bad option.
I think Tony's response is spot on. I think you just, as an owner, you need to understand what you're spending and what you're getting. There's full blast and repaint. There's full overcoat. There's spot paint and there's zone painting. Those are typically the 4 different categories you get into in looking at maintenance work on a structure. The size of the structure, you just need to be cognizant of what it takes the contractor to access what you're asking them to do. The spot painting, if there's a lot of places that you expect to be addressed in spot painting, more often than not, you are better off just to do a full project, full blast and repaint or full overcoat to address them all, because they got to get there somehow.
Just remember one thing. When you clean an area, this is one thing you always want to keep in your mind as an owner. You're almost going to double the size of that area when you clean it. So like when we talk to clients or we talk to industry people, and if you're getting to the point where you're at 20 to 30% corrosion on that structure, just realize that when you clean it, feather it, and do all those things, you've almost doubled the size. So that's why when you get to that point, you want to just really think about full removal, because it's so costly. You have a contractor. You have a contractor say, you tell them you have 10,000 square feet of spot repair, and the engineer's going to go out there and circle the areas. That is so costly, number one, and they'll eat up that 10,000 square feet really fast. So you really don't want to do spot painting. You want to do zone, or you want to do full removal. And like Derek said, you know, you can overcoat, you can do full removal, or there was a gentleman that used to be with KTA, he's long past now, Eric Klein. He actually wrote an article on beneficial procrastination. So that's even an option, right? So, you know, I mean, it all really depends on the budget of your state and how you want to effectively use it to hit the bridges that you really need to hit, and be smart about it. If there are bridges that are okay, yeah, you know, I always tell people there's two types of failures. There's a corrosion failure, which you do have to take care of, and then there's a cosmetic failure, which, you know, you don't have to worry about it too much. We did a job many years ago for Virginia DOT, and back then they didn't use urethane top coats because of isocyanates. They were concerned about that. So they applied the epoxy top coat, and it was brown. About a year later, I get a call from VDOT saying, Tony, you need to come down here. All our bridges are pink. So I go down there, and I said, that's a pretty pink color, you know. And I told him, I said, let's go up to the top there. And I just wiped my hand, and it chalked. So that brown from the UV, and it just happened to the exterior beams. The interior beams are all brown, but the exterior beams were pink. I said, so you can leave it there. If you want to pressure wash it, put another coat of epoxy. But I said, until you start using urethane top coats, you're going to have this issue.
Yeah, and I would say the same, really, what these gentlemen have said is most of the costs associated with getting to the project with the crew, the equipment, it's just more worth, it's better bang for the buck for the state if, like you said, you maybe procrastinated a little bit and waited to just do the full structure at that point in time, because a lot of those ancillary costs as a contractor we can't remove, whether it's you know, zone painting, spot painting. You've still got to get the people there, the equipment, and all the material. And at that point, like we said, once the bridge structure is rigged, there's not much difference than just doing the whole thing and doing those small areas.
I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of concurrence, a lot of north-south head shaking between the panel members. So, I mean, he hit on a great topic. So, thank you for that conversation.
Georgia, we used to do that not spot painting, the zone painting, close to the bearing and that. We're moving away from that, just based on the cost. Because
North Carolina, I mean, we're in that same similar boat based on the grade of steel and the location of the structure. And sometimes some of the short beams, you know, on some of the short weathering steel span beams, you know, by the time you do, typically most states do 2 times the girder width out, and so, you know, by the time on an approach span, you may already be 3/4 of the way through, and you're just leaving a little patch in the middle. So, and again, it's kind of up to the ownership, up to the specifier, and to determine that. So that's great conversation. Great conversation. Clock. I wanted to give the panel members an opportunity to really speak about their particular product position to the audience, and then we can open up back up to the audience for other specific topic questions as we get ready to wrap up. Perspective from inspection company aspect, maybe high level, something you want to just a topic or. Well,
The biggest thing, again, when I go talk to clients and people that maintenance engineers who deal with bridge painting, the biggest thing I tell them is, don't just put out a generic specification. It's easy to say, okay, you're going to put a containment system up, it's an SP10 zinc epoxy urethane. Every bridge has unique issues, right? Inaccessible, hard to reach areas, you got your bearing areas. When you put together a specification, go out there and look at those structures that you're going to include in that specification and point out those areas and put them in your special provisions. Let the contractor know, that there are going to be some areas that you're going to have a tough time with. And Mr. Contractor, as part of your submittals, we want you to be proactive and give us a plan on how you're going to address those areas, that could have an issue with surface preparation or even coating application. So don't be generic. Try to design a specification specific for the structures that you're putting out. What that will do is lower the opportunity for a contractor to put a claim in. Hey, you know, look, there are all these areas, lattice, back-to-back angles, box beams that we weren't aware about, right? So you want to make sure that you give enough detail to that contractor, letting them know that on these specific bridges, these are some of the things that, you know, you need to be aware of. You'll get a better estimate, right, or a better bid price, and the contractor will be more educated. And if you can, you know, mandatory pre-bid meetings, if you can do that where you take the contractor out, Kentucky used to do that years ago, where they would take the contractors out and take a look at those structures, and those were mandatory. If you didn't attend those pre-bid meetings, you were not allowed to bid on those projects. Because again, they wanted to make sure that the contractor knew what they're bidding on, what kind of project. I mean, I've reviewed many submittals over the years, and I've had a contractor submit their containment plan showing a bridge with sidewalks. Well, the bridge had no sidewalks. So I'm like, where did this come from? Do you know the bridge that you're doing or what you're aware of? So it's a little bit education with those pre-bid mandatory meetings, and again, designing your specifications based on the structures you're including on that job will relieve a lot of issues and maybe create a lot less issues with, again, you know, change orders and those type of things.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Taylor?
Yeah, so I think the big thing for me, and I want to preface this by saying I think that it's a benefit of having a third-party inspection company on the job site as well. For me personally, I think the most I've ever learned in my career was actually in Maine because of the experience of the third-party inspector that I was working with. He had 20 years of experience. He had done some things in nuclear, DOT, had gone to Europe, and it was honestly it was honestly the thing that I've always taken away the most, was because of his knowledge. He was able to help us be in compliance with the specification. But then I go back to the flip side, which we talked about earlier, is the inexperience. So I think for me as a contractor, or us as a contractor in general, is understanding who we're going to be working with on every single project, because that's always, for me, the most anxiety I have as a contractor, is not knowing who is going to be out there that we can work with, that we can establish a relationship, just not in a pre-coatings meeting, but you know, the weeks leading up to it, so we're all on the same page. So when we get out there, you're hitting the ground running, instead of having to establish a relationship with somebody that it's a checks and balances system, right, the entire time. And if you don't have a good relationship with them, then that becomes a headache and an issue. And again, I think it's necessary because it also protects me, right, just as the owner. But again, it's making sure that it's an experienced team together. They're working well together, and hopefully that, you know, for us, again, some knowledge, or you know, maybe more meetings leading up to the job with who's going to be actually out there running would do a lot more benefits, because I think even for the state, that would make them more comfortable, at least in my eyes, because you've got a relationship established. You may be able to see some issues up front before the project actually takes off. And then for us as well, understanding, okay, this is how they're going to work with, this is how we can talk with them, this is how we can go through the documentation process, the inspection process. So as we're getting to those points and those hold point inspections, there's no questions. We're just moving forward, and we all understand what each other is looking for.
That's great. Thank you.
So as a coating manufacturer, I'll take opportunity to address the issue with coating supply in the industry. And it is a problem. It's a real problem. I know we're 2 years into COVID and whatever else, and manufacturing delays and raw material supply issues. They are still persistent. They are getting better. Raw materials are getting better. But now we're at a point, even as the world's largest coatings manufacturer, we are at a point where we have depleted any type of stockpile of materials. In pre-2019, we would sell through the painting season for bridges or whatever facilities it was, and during the slower season, the wintertime, we would still run plants at pretty much full capacity in order to stock inventory in distribution centers. And that way we would be fully stocked for the next painting season. 2020, that didn't happen. 21, that didn't happen because we didn't have the raw materials. We were hand to mouth, and it's all the manufacturers. It's an industry-wide problem. We were hand to mouth trying to supply projects that were ongoing, and it's just a fact of the matter. Demand, especially in structural steel and bridge coatings, demand is outstripping supply, and has for the last 2 years. So we anticipate with raw materials becoming better availability, more timely delivery of raw materials. Now we are facing manufacturing capacity, maximizing or pushing manufacturing capacity to the top level so that we can continue to supply projects as we go into the fall season, and we will continue to run manufacturing through the winter, and we anticipate to be in somewhat of a better position next spring. This is not flipping a light switch. You're not going to turn this on, turn this off. It will take some time, but we are improving as a manufacturing community in being able to supply more projects timely. But it's not, I'm sure Taylor would comment, it's not ideal. And it's not ideal for anyone. Sarah, Illinois is doing tons of work. And Illinois is a little upset with Sherwin-Williams because we're delaying projects, but we're doing everything we can to get material out, and that's Illinois is an example where it's every state.
Thank you, Derek. Robbie?
As an owner and DOT, I just wanted to bounce back some ideas like what we can do as far as our special provision or inspection program, so that way we get a better product which lasts longer. And I think I got an opportunity to learn a few things, and I think I'll try to implement in Georgia, as far as see how much the cost difference would be once we start introducing 2 years of warranty, plus adding inspection, and certified inspector for the whole time, rather than just getting him in and out for a couple of hours. So it all depends on the cost. If it is not significantly high, I would like to go that route, make sure we're getting a good product which lasts for 20, 25 years.
And I just wanted to pose, regardless of the project, it's my opinion the biggest highway to failure is communication. When we don't communicate from the top level all the way through the inspector on the job, we pose a huge gap and having your project fail, right? Not because of a product, not because of inspection, but just simple lack of communication. And I understand we all love the cell phone, and I love mine, right? But bottom line is that we need to increase our communication, ensure that we are opening up conversations for constraints and other items constraints and expectations of both parties. So I guess that's my perspective there. So,
just want to make one last plug. As I said earlier, for those who deal with it, both the National Association of Corrosion Engineers and the Society for Protective Coatings have joined and become one organization, AMP, as I stated. And for you, those that develop specifications or write specifications, you can go to amp.org, and there's a lot of good information there in helping develop standards and specifications. It's all right there. And any of the people here that are DOT or people that are deal with DOT work, I'm the chair of the Transportation Technical Committee for AMP, and my email's on the stuff. If you want to join, you can reach out, and I can show you how to do that as well. But they're a great source of information for DOTs and pretty much anybody who designs bridge painting specifications, or any paint specifications, really.
So just to piggyback on Tony with AMP, for any of you that are not involved in AMP and would like to be, you can participate on the standards development program, the standards committees. You are welcome to participate in the standards committees, whether you're a member or a non-member. You do not have to be a member. You don't have to join the association to actually play an active role in the development of the consensus documents produced under AMP or reviewed under AMP. So if you have questions about that, Tony or either one can talk to you. While Tony's heavily involved in the certification side, I'm the current chair of the Standards Program Committee for AMP. So my committee oversees the development of all the consensus documents, technical reports, standards, guides, all the documents coming out of AMP. So would encourage you to get involved, become a volunteer. The standards process, the consensus standards process, works better with the more viewpoints, more educated viewpoints that we have. So.
Yeah, those are all great points, and just to also talk about it, the majority of DOT standards are not intellectually copyrighted, so feel free to peruse at least our NCDOT specifications, as well as other states. I mean, they're free, available out there, as well as take advantage of your memberships through the AMP and or SSPC and NACE to acquire a copy of those. So. Closing, last 2 minutes of your time today.
Just to clarify with the combining of the NACE and SSPC, are those standards going to go away and then just be replaced by AMP's
No.
designations, or?
No. Any of the existing SSPC, the legacy SSPC documents and legacy NACE documents will continue to exist under their previous designation. So, yeah, SSPC PA2, that one's been around forever and the source of a lot of angst. That's still going to be called SSPC PA2, and you'll still be recognized that way. Now, when you get a new copy of it, it will have the AMP logo stamped all over it, but we are not changing the designations or changing the titles or the document numbers. As AMP produces new standards, then they will fall into an AMP designation and AMP numbering system. But it is not retroactive.
That's a great question, because we all love paying for standards twice, right? So in closing, I'm sure maybe many of the panel members, including myself, we can hang around for additional questions, but I do want to thank AASHTO and the TSP2 committee for hosting and providing this opportunity and providing this space and time to generate questions about coatings. Like, it's almost someone's most unfavorite topic, and so we had a great turnout. So thank you to all of you, and again, thank you to our board members for allowing a little bit of full circle visibility into their prospective careers, and again, thank you. So if there's additional questions, be glad to host them individually. So thank you very much for your attendance.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.